The town of Brooksville, nestled just outside the bustling heart of a major U.S. city, was the kind of place people moved to when they were tired of noise and chaos. Rows of neat houses lined quiet streets where neighbors greeted each other with polite smiles. Children played until dusk, and the biggest commotion usually came from high school football games or summer block parties. To anyone passing through, it looked like the picture of peace and order, the kind of place where bad things weren't supposed to happen. But that illusion shattered one brisk autumn morning. The headline on every local paper was impossible to ignore. Respected businessman accused in shocking case. The man in question was Daniel Mercer, a longtime resident of Brooksville, known for his polished manners, his successful construction company, and his position as a donor to local charities. He had shaken hands with nearly everyone in town at some point, sponsored youth programs, and hosted holiday dinners for neighbors. To many, he was the embodiment of the American dream, hardworking, generous, and dependable. So when news broke that Daniel was accused of a crime so disturbing, so unimaginable, the town split into two camps, those who refused to believe it, and those who began whispering that maybe they had always sensed something was off. The courthouse was usually a place reserved for routine hearings, minor disputes, the occasional burglary case, or civil matters over land. But on the first day of Daniel Mercer's trial, it looked like a media circus. Vans from major news outlets lined the street. Reporters with cameras and microphones huddled near the courthouse steps, their voices carrying over the crowd as they gave live updates. Curious residents, unable to resist the lure of such a scandal, flocked to the scene, hoping to get inside. Inside the courtroom, every bench was filled. The polished wood walls and tall windows lent the room an air of solemnity, but the buzz of anticipation undercut it. People whispered in hushed tones, casting glances at Daniel as he sat at the defense table. His expensive suit was immaculate, his hair neatly combed, and his expression unreadable. He looked more like a man waiting for a business meeting than one facing charges that could ruin his life. The prosecution appeared tense but determined, led by District Attorney Carla Jennings, a sharp-minded woman with a reputation for toughness. She knew the case was weak on physical evidence. What they had was largely circumstantial, inconsistencies in Daniel's statements, vague testimonies from neighbors, and a few forensic traces that didn't definitively prove guilt. Jennings was painfully aware that a skilled defense team could twist the narrative and sway the jury. And Daniel's defense attorney, Martin Cole, was more than skilled. He was a showman, charismatic and confident, known for dismantling prosecutors with precision. His mere presence at the table made the prosecution's job harder. The atmosphere grew heavy as the judge, stern and deliberate, entered the courtroom. With a rap of his gavel, he called the trial to order. As the opening statements began, the jury sat in a neat row, their expressions ranging from skeptical to intrigued. Some jurors already looked sympathetic toward Daniel. After all, he was one of their own, a community figure. Others seemed wary, waiting to hear more. In the gallery, a mother shifted uneasily with her young daughter at her side. The little girl was just 3 years old, her small legs dangling off the bench as she clutched a stuffed bunny. Her name was Lily, and unlike everyone else in the room, she wasn't concerned with speeches or legal arguments. Her wide brown eyes wandered curiously, landing not on the attorneys or even the judge, but on the tall German shepherd seated near the front. Officer Max, the police K-9, brought in for security. Lily's mother had debated whether to bring her to court at all. But with no babysitter available, and a trial expected to stretch on for weeks, she had no choice. She assumed Lily would fidget, maybe fall asleep, or distract herself with her toy. What she didn't know was that Lily would notice something no one else could, something that would change everything. As the prosecution laid out their case, the courtroom seemed divided between belief and doubt. Daniel sat motionless, his lawyer occasionally whispering in his ear. The prosecution emphasized the seriousness of the crime, painting a picture of betrayal and hidden darkness beneath Daniel's polished exterior. Still, without hard evidence, the story felt fragile. In the back rows, townspeople exchanged uncertain looks. Some shook their heads, unwilling to believe a man like Daniel could be guilty. Others leaned forward, their faces tight with suspicion, as though they had been waiting for someone powerful to finally fall. The defense, when it was their turn, spoke with confidence. Martin Cole assured the jury that his client was innocent, that the charges were baseless, and that the prosecution's case was built on nothing but speculation. He reminded them of Daniel's contributions to the community, his spotless record, and his standing as a family man. "This is a witch hunt," Cole declared, his voice booming. "A man's life is being torn apart by flimsy accusations and rumor." The jury listened closely, and for a moment, it seemed Cole's words carried more weight than anything the prosecution had said. But while the adults argued and analyzed, Lily sat quietly, swinging her legs and hugging her bunny. Her attention was fixed on Max, the police dog, whose calm presence seemed strangely alive, as though he too were paying attention to every word spoken in the room. The trial had only just begun, but already it was clear this would not be an ordinary case. The evidence was weak, the defense was strong, and the truth seemed buried under layers of lies and uncertainty. Yet the smallest person in the room, overlooked by nearly everyone, was watching closely. And though no one realized it yet, Lily's innocent eyes and a loyal dog's instincts were about to reveal what no lawyer could. The courtroom's air was thick with tension as the first day drew to a close. Reporters rushed outside to deliver updates, jurors were escorted away, and Daniel left flanked by his attorney, his expression still unreadable. To the townspeople gathered on the courthouse steps, the future looked uncertain. Would justice prevail? Or would influence and clever arguments win the day? No one could have predicted that the turning point of the trial would not come from a lawyer's brilliance, a witness's testimony, or a sudden piece of evidence. Instead, it would come from a child too young to understand the weight of her words, and from a dog who refused to ignore the truth. The seeds of revelation had been planted. All it needed was a moment, one unexpected, innocent moment, to unravel everything. While most eyes in the courtroom were glued to the accused, or the lawyers sparring back and forth, Lily sat quietly, almost invisible to the crowd. At 3 years old, she seemed like little more than a child tagging along, a distraction her mother wished she didn't have to manage during such serious proceedings. But Lily wasn't a distraction. She was listening, watching, and absorbing in ways no one expected. The bench was far too big for her small frame, and her shoes barely brushed against its polished edge as she swung her legs in a steady rhythm. Her stuffed bunny rested in her lap, its ears worn and frayed from years of constant love. She clutched it with one hand, but used the other to point occasionally, though never loud enough to draw attention. Her mother hushed her each time, whispering reminders to stay quiet. To most adults in the room, the trial was overwhelming. Legal terms flying back and forth, exhibits displayed, objections raised, and rulings delivered in sharp tones by the judge. But for Lily, everything was simple. She didn't understand the technicalities of law or the strategies of attorneys. Instead, she saw people. She watched their faces, listened to their voices, and sensed their emotions. Children have a strange gift, the ability to notice what adults overlook. Adults often dismiss subtle gestures, convinced they are unimportant. But children, unburdened by skepticism, absorb everything. Lily noticed how Daniel Mercer's smile never reached his eyes when his lawyer cracked a joke. She saw how he avoided looking at certain photographs displayed by the prosecution, how his fingers drummed nervously on the table whenever the judge spoke directly to him. But what caught her attention most wasn't Daniel himself. It was Max, the police dog, sitting near the front of the courtroom. From the moment they walked in, Lily's gaze had drifted to him. Max was a large German shepherd, his coat sleek, his posture regal, and his eyes alert. He sat beside his handler, Officer Davis, but it was clear he wasn't just sitting idly. He was working. His ears twitched at certain moments, his body stiffened during others, and though he was calm most of the time, there were rare flashes of tension that Lily alone seemed to notice. Every time Daniel spoke, Max seemed to shift. His ears perked, his nose flared, and once, Lily could swear he let out a faint, rumbling growl. No one else reacted. Maybe they hadn't heard it, or maybe they dismissed it as nothing. But Lily didn't dismiss it. Her young mind connected dots in ways adults might not. "Dog nose," she whispered softly, almost inaudibly, to her bunny. Her mother glanced at her, confused. Lily, just be quiet, okay?" But Lily couldn't help herself. Something about Max fascinated her. She watched him more than she watched the trial, her big brown eyes following his every move. When Daniel shifted in his chair, Max's tail stopped wagging. When Daniel leaned forward, Max's gaze sharpened, as if focused on some invisible signal. For the jury, the trial was a puzzle. For the lawyers, it was a battle. But for Lily, it was a story, and Max was the main character. During recess, Lily tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, the dog doesn't like him," she said, nodding toward Daniel. Her mother sighed, brushing her daughter's hair back from her face. "Dogs don't like lots of people, honey." It doesn't mean anything, but to Lily, it meant everything. Children are free from the filters adults develop, the filters that tell them not to trust instincts, not to believe in feelings, not to say things that might seem silly. To Lily, what she saw was the truth. Back inside, the trial resumed. Witnesses were called. A neighbor spoke nervously about hearing arguments late at night. A forensic analyst tried to explain how certain fibers matched items found in Daniel's home. The defense tore into each testimony, poking holes and leaving the jury uncertain. To many, it looked as though Daniel might really walk free. But Lily noticed something strange. When the defense lawyer made a particularly strong point, Max didn't react. He remained calm, his head resting against his handler's knee. But when Daniel himself spoke, insisting on his innocence, Max's posture changed. His muscles tightened, his ears snapped forward, and his body leaned ever so slightly in Daniel's direction. To a trained officer, these were subtle cues. To a child, they were blaring alarms. By the end of the day, Lily had grown restless. 3-year-olds weren't built for long hours on hard benches. She slumped against her mother, eyelids heavy, but her eyes kept flickering toward Max. She hadn't said much, but the thought repeated in her head like a mantra. Dog nose. Dog nose. That night, back at home, Lily replayed the courtroom scenes with her stuffed bunny. She sat him on the edge of her bed, pretending he was Daniel, while another toy, a plush dog, sat across from him. She mimicked Max's posture, stiff and alert, then wagged the toy dog's tail when she pretended the lawyer spoke. Finally, she made the dog growl when the bad man talked. Her mother overheard and felt a pang of worry. She dismissed it as childish imagination, but something about the way Lily reenacted the dog's behavior unsettled her. The trial pressed on for several more days, and Lily was always there, sitting silently, unnoticed by most. She rarely fidgeted now, her attention fixed. Reporters never mentioned her in their coverage, and the jury barely noticed her existence. She was just a little girl in the background. But in truth, she was watching more closely than anyone. The courtroom was a stage, every person playing a part. The lawyers were performers, the witnesses reluctant actors, the judge a stern director. And at the center sat Daniel Mercer, playing the role of the falsely accused man. Many believed his act, but Lily saw through it, not with evidence or reasoning, but with the clear, sharp instinct of innocence. And with Max at her side, she wasn't alone. By the end of the second week, the prosecution's case looked ready to collapse. The jury seemed unconvinced, the defense confident. Whispers around town suggested Daniel might be acquitted. The thought filled some with outrage, others with relief. But Lily, quiet and watchful, knew something the rest did not. She had no words for it, no adult logic to explain it. All she knew was this: the dog knew the truth, and so did she. Max was more than just a dog, at least to those who knew him well. To the outside world, he was a large, well-trained German shepherd with an imposing stance and intelligent eyes. But to Officer Davis, his longtime handler, Max was a partner, a guardian, and sometimes a better judge of character than any human could ever hope to be. Max had been trained for years in scent detection, tracking, and emotional cues. He could pick up on subtle changes in behavior, sense fear, and identify inconsistencies during interrogations. To Officer Davis, it wasn't magic. It was instinct sharpened by rigorous training. But there were moments, rare ones, when even Davis wondered if Max understood more than he should. The first day Max walked into the Brooksville courthouse, heads turned. His size alone commanded attention. Standing tall, his thick coat gleaming, he was the picture of discipline. Children in the gallery whispered excitedly, but adults kept their distance, aware of the quiet authority he carried. Max wasn't there to entertain. He was there to work. At first, his assignment was routine. Courtrooms could grow tense, emotions flaring when testimony struck nerves. Max's presence calmed potential outbursts. He stood guard, a silent reminder that order would be maintained. But from the moment Daniel Mercer entered, Max was different. His ears twitched, his head lifted, and his body leaned ever so slightly forward. Officer Davis noticed it, of course. He always noticed Max's behavior, but he dismissed it initially. After all, Max was still a dog, and dogs could react to smells, noises, or even a person's cologne. Davis gave Max a subtle pat on his shoulder, signaling him to stay calm, and Max obeyed. Still, the alertness in his eyes didn't fade. As the trial progressed, Max's reactions became more pointed. He didn't react to the lawyers, nor to the witnesses who shuffled nervously to the stand. But when Daniel spoke, especially when he looked at the jury and declared his innocence, Max stiffened. His ears snapped forward, his breathing grew sharper, and once, during a particularly passionate denial, a low rumble escaped his throat. The sound wasn't loud. Most people in the room didn't hear it. But Lily did. Sitting on the bench beside her mother, the little girl had been watching Max more than anyone else. Each time he moved, she leaned forward, her bunny dangling in her lap. She noticed how his tail wagged when Officer Davis gave him quiet praise, but how it stopped dead when Daniel spoke. She saw the difference between calm stillness and tense stillness. To a child, it was obvious. Max didn't like the man in the suit. "Dog knows," she whispered again, pressing her face against her bunny's ear. Max, of course, couldn't understand her words. But when her wide eyes locked with his, there was an unspoken connection. It was as though they shared the same secret. Something about Daniel wasn't right. Officer Davis tried to keep Max's reactions under control. A courtroom was no place for distraction, and the last thing he wanted was the defense accusing the police of using intimidation tactics. But the more Daniel spoke, the harder it became to ignore Max's instincts. His partner wasn't restless without reason. One afternoon, during cross-examination, Daniel raised his voice in frustration. His calm facade cracked for just a second, and in that moment, Max growled, louder this time. The sound rolled through the courtroom like distant thunder. Every head turned. The judge banged his gavel. "Order in the court," he demanded, glaring at Davis. "My apologies, Your Honor," Davis said quickly, tugging on Max's leash. The dog reacted unexpectedly. It won't happen again. But the damage was done. For the first time, the jury looked at Daniel with unease. Reporters scribbled furiously, already imagining the headlines. Police dog growls at accused man during trial. Daniel tried to laugh it off, shaking his head as if it were ridiculous to take a dog seriously. His lawyer leaned into the performance, cracking a joke about canine theatrics. The gallery chuckled nervously. But behind the laughter, doubt began to grow. Lily, sitting silently, leaned against her mother. "See, Mommy? The dog knows," she said again, louder this time. Her mother shushed her, cheeks reddening as a few people glanced their way. But Lily didn't care. In her young mind, the truth was already simple. That evening, as the courthouse emptied, Officer Davis crouched beside Max. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly, scratching behind his partner's ears. Max leaned against him, calm now, but his sharp eyes still carried a weight that Davis couldn't shake. He had trusted Max for years, followed his lead on countless cases, and Max had never been wrong. If Max didn't trust Daniel, there was a reason. The next day, the prosecution subtly shifted strategy. Though they couldn't use Max as evidence, a dog's instincts didn't qualify in court. They could lean into the doubt he had created. Jennings, the district attorney, began highlighting Daniel's micro-expressions, the nervous twitches, the inconsistencies in his tone. She painted a picture, not of a calm, innocent man, but of someone carefully constructing a facade. The defense countered fiercely, but Max's growl still echoed in everyone's memory. Meanwhile, Lily grew bolder. She whispered less to her bunny and more to her mother, pointing out each time Max reacted. Her mother, torn between embarrassment and curiosity, started noticing it too. And once you noticed, it was impossible to unsee. By the end of the week, the courtroom was no longer focused solely on the arguments. Subconsciously, people began glancing at Max during key moments, as though waiting for his verdict. Jurors, reporters, even the judge occasionally flicked their eyes toward the dog. Max had become more than just a silent guard. He was a symbol of instinct, of truth untainted by bias, of loyalty to something greater than words. And though no one admitted it out loud, the trial no longer felt like a battle between lawyers. It felt like a waiting game, a question of whether the truth Max sensed could ever be proven in human terms. Innocence doesn't lie, and neither do dogs. That unspoken truth lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. And sitting quietly with her bunny, Lily knew one thing for certain. Max wasn't just watching. He was warning them. By the third week of the trial, the courtroom had settled into a strange rhythm. Witnesses came and went. The prosecution pushed its fragile case, weaving circumstantial evidence into a narrative of guilt. The defense countered with confidence, dismantling details, sowing doubt, and charming the jury with reminders of Daniel Mercer's spotless reputation. If not for the dog, it might have looked like the case was slipping away. Max sat as he always did, still, alert, every muscle coiled in quiet readiness. His handler, Officer Davis, kept him steady, aware of the eyes that flicked toward them whenever Daniel spoke. It was unspoken, but undeniable. Max had become a shadow presence in the trial, a silent player whose opinion seemed to carry weight none could quite explain. Daniel noticed it too. At first, he had ignored the dog, but now, whenever Max's eyes fixed on him, Daniel's jaw tightened ever so slightly. It was subtle, but to a man whose life depended on appearances, it mattered. That Tuesday afternoon, the prosecution called Daniel himself to the stand. It was a risky move. Allowing the accused to testify always came with dangers, but Daniel's lawyer had insisted he could sway the jury with his charm and calm demeanor. Daniel was confident he could handle the questions, and his lawyer believed the jury needed to see him as a family man, not a monster. The courtroom held its breath as Daniel took the oath and sat down. His suit was perfect, his expression measured. He looked every bit the respectable businessman wrongfully accused. But Max was already tense. From the moment Daniel opened his mouth, Max's ears shot up. His gaze locked like a spotlight, unblinking, intense. His chest expanded with each slow breath, and his tail, still only moments before, now lay stiff as a board. Lily noticed first. Her bunny clutched tight. She whispered urgently to her mother, "Dog knows." Her mother hushed her, eyes darting around to see if anyone had heard. But a few people had. A reporter scribbled quickly, and one juror raised an eyebrow, though no one dared say anything aloud. Daniel began with practiced ease. He spoke of his love for his family, his contributions to the community, the unfairness of the accusations. His voice was smooth, but every sentence was punctuated by Max's growing tension. And then it happened. When the prosecutor pressed him on an inconsistency, a timeline that didn't add up, Daniel leaned forward, his voice rising as he snapped, "I've already explained this." In that instant, Max erupted. A deep, guttural growl thundered from his chest, rolling across the silent courtroom like an earthquake. His hackles rose, his teeth flashed, and his body strained against the leash. Officer Davis tightened his grip, commanding, "Max, heel!" But the dog's focus never wavered from Daniel. His eyes burned, unrelenting, as if he saw something no one else could. The courtroom froze. Gasps filled the gallery. A juror dropped her pen. The judge slammed his gavel furiously. "Order! Order in this court!" Daniel paled. For the first time since the trial began, his confident mask cracked. A flicker of fear, raw and unguarded, flashed across his face. It was gone in seconds, replaced by a forced smirk, but it had been there, and everyone had seen it. "Control your animal, Officer Davis." The judge barked. "Yes, Your Honor," Davis said firmly, pulling Max back to his side. The dog obeyed, but his body remained tense, his growl fading only reluctantly. The defense attorney rose quickly, seizing the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we all understand dogs react to all sorts of things. Sounds, smells, even nerves in the room. This is no indication of guilt. Let's not let theatrics distract from the facts." He forced a laugh, but it rang hollow. Because the truth was, the dog hadn't reacted to nerves or random noise. He had reacted to Daniel. Everyone felt it. The jury shifted uncomfortably. For days they had wrestled with doubt, weighing thin evidence against a man's reputation. But now, with one growl, the balance seemed to tip. They didn't want to admit it. Dogs weren't witnesses, but the instinct was powerful. In the gallery, Lily couldn't stay silent. She stood on the bench, pointing a tiny finger. "See? Dog knows." The words rang out, pure and unfiltered. The courtroom stilled again. Her mother yanked her down, mortified, whispering harshly, "Lily, sit quietly." But the damage was done. The child's voice carried farther than anyone expected. Innocent, uncoached, undeniable. Reporters' pens flew across pages. Headlines were already being written in their minds. "Child points at police dog, says dog knows in Mercer trial." The judge cleared his throat, visibly rattled. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are to disregard the dog's behavior and the child's words. They have no bearing on this case. Do I make myself clear?" The jurors nodded obediently, but their faces betrayed them. They had seen it, they had heard it, and they couldn't unsee it now. Daniel tried to continue, but his voice had lost its polish. His words stumbled, his tone defensive. The prosecutor pressed harder, sensing weakness. Every denial sounded thinner, every explanation weaker. And through it all, Max sat silently now, his job done. He had spoken in the only way he knew how, not with words, but with instinct. That night, the town buzzed with rumors. The trial, already a spectacle, had become something almost surreal. People gathered in diners, living rooms, and outside the courthouse, whispering about the dog and the little girl. Maybe he really does know, someone said. It's just coincidence, another argued, though without conviction. Children don't lie, came the reply. And neither do dogs. In the days that followed, the trial changed. Every time Daniel spoke, jurors watched him differently. Every time he raised his voice, they remembered Max's growl. The prosecution, reinvigorated, leaned into the unease, pushing harder, digging deeper. And Lily? She remained quiet, but her eyes never left Max. To her, the case was already decided. She had seen the truth, clear as day. The adults could argue all they wanted, but the dog had spoken. And sometimes, that was enough. The courtroom had reached a tension so thick, it seemed almost tangible. Jurors shifted in their seats, trying not to reveal the unease gnawing at them. Daniel Mercer, once confident and composed, now fidgeted with his hands, his polished suit feeling heavier with every passing moment. Even the seasoned defense attorney, Martin Cole, felt a subtle tremor in his control over the courtroom. Lily sat on the edge of her mother's seat, her brown eyes wide, glued to Max. The dog had returned to his usual calm posture after the growl that had rocked the court. But to Lily, the meaning was clear. Max was alert. He knew. And so did she. Her small fingers clutched her bunny tighter as a whisper escaped her lips. "Dog knows," she said, barely audible. Her mother gasped and tried to hush her, leaning close and whispering, "Lily, she—" "Stay quiet." But Lily's voice carried further than anyone imagined. The sharp, innocent clarity of a child's observation has a way of slicing through tension. This time, several jurors caught the words. The judge, momentarily distracted by the rustle, glanced toward the gallery, frowning. Daniel's face contorted, a mix of disbelief and fear. The phrase repeated in his mind like a relentless echo. "Dog knows." How could a child, a mere toddler, understand anything? And yet, her words felt like a verdict in themselves. The room seemed to pause, the air charged. Officer Davis' hand tightened on Max's leash, as if acknowledging the moment. Even the attorneys felt a shift, subtle but undeniable. The dog had reacted before, but now someone, a human, small and innocent, had reinforced what Max had been trying to signal. Lily's mother tried again, whispering urgently, "Sit down, Lily. Stop talking." But Lily's gaze remained locked on Daniel, unwavering, her small hand lifting to point first at Max, then at the accused. Her voice, though tiny, carried clarity and authority. "Dog knows." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Some laughed nervously, thinking it a child's imagination. Others, including a few jurors, leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. The innocence in her words struck something deeper than reason. Adults may question logic, but a child speaks without deceit, without motive. Judge Reynolds, stern and weary from weeks of testimony, pounded his gavel. "Order! This is highly irregular. The child has no bearing on this case." Court, focus on the facts. But the murmurs didn't subside entirely. People couldn't ignore the child's words, especially not after the growl from Max the previous day. Subconsciously, jurors began replaying the reactions they had witnessed, The dog's tension, the subtle signs Daniel couldn't hide, and now the child pointing it out with unassuming clarity. The prosecution seized the moment carefully. District Attorney Carla Jennings didn't need to reference Lily directly. She simply allowed the unease to linger, reinforcing the cracks in Daniel's composure with her cross-examination. She pressed on inconsistencies, minor details that had previously seemed insignificant. With each pointed question, Daniel's confidence slipped, his carefully practiced answers faltering under the weight of scrutiny. Max shifted slightly beside Officer Davis. Though calm, he exuded quiet intensity, alert and aware. Lily noticed every movement. She didn't understand why the dog reacted this way, only that it validated what she felt. Daniel was hiding something. She glanced back at her mother and whispered to herself, "See? He knows too." Daniel's defense team tried to regain control, weaving arguments about circumstantial evidence and the unreliability of intuition. Martin Cole stood and addressed the jury, pointing out how unpredictable animals could be, how children often misinterpret things, how all of this should be disregarded. His voice was steady, commanding, but beneath it, tension lurked. Every movement Daniel made was being scrutinized, not just by the prosecution, but by every subtle observer in the room. Yet nothing could erase what had happened. The combination of Max's instincts and Lily's innocent declaration had shifted the courtroom dynamic. A subtle fear now flickered behind Daniel's eyes, a recognition that he had misjudged the power of truth expressed in innocence. As the day wore on, a strange energy settled over the proceedings. Witnesses testified, but jurors' attention occasionally drifted to the front row, watching Lily, and then to Max, who had become a silent arbiter. The words "dog knows" echoed in the back of their minds. During recess, reporters swarmed the steps outside the courthouse. While they didn't want to sensationalize a child, some couldn't resist. Cameras flashed as a few asked, half-jokingly, if a toddler had really spoken up. The story circulated quickly through town, and whispers reached every diner, office, and playground. People debated, could a child really reveal a truth that adults had missed? Back inside, the trial continued, and the prosecution felt renewed momentum. Carla Jennings carefully recalibrated her questioning, emphasizing the inconsistencies in Daniel's narrative. Each answer he gave was dissected, replayed in the minds of the jurors, and unconsciously measured against the growls of Max and the innocent pronouncement of Lily. By the end of the day, the court had witnessed an unusual event. A child had spoken, and the courtroom had paused to listen. The implications were subtle, but profound. While no legal precedent recognized the testimony of a 3-year-old or the instincts of a dog as admissible evidence, the psychological impact on those present was undeniable. For Daniel, the effect was visceral. He had maintained a calm exterior for weeks, carefully controlling every gesture, every word. But now, under the combined weight of instinct and innocence, his defenses faltered. A twitch of his hand, a slight shift in tone, a fleeting hesitation, all were magnified in the eyes of the jury. Lily, unaware of the magnitude of her act, clutched her bunny as her mother guided her back to her seat. She whispered once more, softly, "Dog knows," as if confirming it for herself. It was not defiance, nor rebellion. It was a child articulating what she instinctively understood. And in that simple, 2-word declaration, the courtroom changed. That night, townspeople gathered outside coffee shops, diners, and on porches, recounting the day's events in hushed tones. Some were skeptical, others captivated. Everyone agreed on one thing. Something extraordinary had occurred. A child had spoken, and the dog had validated what adults could not see. Inside, the jurors went home with a new, unspoken burden. They didn't know how to quantify it, didn't know if it counted as evidence, but the instinct that the dog's reaction and the child's observation conveyed had lodged itself firmly in their minds. It would influence how they interpreted every subsequent piece of testimony. Daniel, meanwhile, returned home uneasy. For the first time, he questioned his control over the trial. The polished mask he had maintained so diligently for weeks now seemed fragile. Every glance at the courtroom memory, the child's finger pointing, Max's unwavering stare, haunted him. He realized he had underestimated the courtroom's unseen forces. Innocence, it seemed, could wield more power than experience. And Max? He slept that night, curled at Officer Davis's feet, seemingly calm. But his instincts were sharp, ready for the next day, ready to respond if the truth demanded it. Lily dreamed of the dog and the man in the suit. She didn't know why the tension felt heavy, why her words mattered, or why adults whispered so much when she said, "Dog knows." But in her dream, everything was simple. The dog knew, and so did she. Tomorrow, the trial would continue. But the momentum had shifted irreversibly. The courtroom now hummed with the invisible weight of two unlikely witnesses. A loyal dog and a 3-year-old child whose voice, though small, carried more power than anyone could have imagined. The morning sun streamed through the tall courthouse windows, but the tension inside the courtroom was far from warm. After Lily's startling declaration the previous day, the dynamics of the trial had shifted subtly but profoundly. Daniel Mercer, once confident and polished, now carried a slight edge of unease in his posture. His suit no longer seemed enough to shield him. He adjusted his tie repeatedly, cleared his throat more often than usual, and avoided eye contact with the jurors. The prosecution, sensing the momentum, quietly re-examined overlooked details from earlier testimony. They weren't searching for new evidence so much as connecting dots that had been ignored, traces, patterns, and small inconsistencies that, when linked, told a story more compelling than any argument. District Attorney Carla Jennings had always been meticulous, and now she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Lily's words and Max's growl were catalysts, reminding her that even seemingly insignificant observations could reveal the truth. The jurors, meanwhile, carried a silent weight. No one explicitly mentioned Lily's words or the dog's reactions, but the memory lingered like a shadow in the back of their minds. Each new witness was scrutinized against that backdrop, each statement measured against the instinctual warning they had all sensed, even if subconsciously. It began with something minor. A fiber, previously dismissed by a forensic analyst, was re-examined under higher magnification. At first glance, it seemed inconsequential, a stray thread easily overlooked. But when compared with fibers found at the scene of the alleged crime, a match emerged. The small detail that had seemed trivial before now carried weight. Next came fingerprints. One set, faint and partial, had been deemed unidentifiable. But with modern enhancement technology, analysts confirmed a partial print matched Daniel's, a subtle yet undeniable connection. Each new piece of evidence alone might not have convinced a jury. But together, like points on a map, they traced a path no one could ignore. Max's presence became even more crucial. The dog's behavior, once dismissed as mere instinct, now seemed eerily prescient. During certain testimonies, Max tensed when Daniel's explanations conflicted with previously collected evidence. He didn't bark or growl every time, but subtle shifts, the stiffening of his legs, the piercing stare, the flicker of his tail, matched the inconsistencies the prosecution highlighted. Officer Davis began quietly documenting the dog's reactions, not as formal evidence, but as a record for internal reference, knowing it might be critical in understanding Daniel's behavior. Lily noticed it too. The child's fascination with Max had only grown. She whispered to her mother during breaks, "See? He knows it's him." Her mother, torn between embarrassment and awe, tried to hush her, but couldn't completely dismiss the certainty in her daughter's tone. To Lily, Max wasn't just a dog. He was an honest witness, one who couldn't be bribed, intimidated, or swayed. The prosecution's renewed focus revealed other small but telling details. A witness recalled an argument at a late hour. Another admitted to seeing Daniel in a location he had previously denied. Each minor revelation reinforced the broader picture. Individually, these details might have seemed negligible, but together, they formed an undeniable mosaic of guilt. The courtroom began to feel different. The weight of truth, previously suppressed by the defense's confident arguments, now pressed heavily on the atmosphere. Even the judge, experienced and unflappable, seemed to sense the shift. Every movement Daniel made, every attempt to project confidence, was now scrutinized through the lens of instinct and innocence. Daniel's defense team fought valiantly. Martin Cole redirected the jurors' attention, emphasizing circumstantial gaps and questioning the reliability of human memory. But subtle cracks had already appeared. Cole's voice, though forceful, could not mask the nervous energy in the room. Daniel's own behavior betrayed him in small ways. A flick of the eye, a hesitation, a faint tremor of the hands, signals that Max seemed to recognize instantly. Officer Davis noticed these shifts with a quiet intensity. Each time Daniel reacted, Max's posture changed imperceptibly. He didn't growl as he had before, but the dog's body language mirrored the inconsistencies the prosecution highlighted. It was as if Max was silently confirming what Lily had observed. There was guilt in the air, a hidden truth now gradually surfacing. Lily, oblivious to the legal intricacies, continued her quiet vigil. She would tap her bunny and glance at Max, connecting the dots in her own simple way. Her small gestures, pointing, murmuring, shifting closer to her mother, were a subconscious reinforcement of the evidence the jury was now being asked to consider. In the court of innocence, the child and the dog had already rendered judgment. As the trial progressed, the tension mounted further. Witness after witness, when confronted with careful questioning, revealed discrepancies that had initially been overlooked. Some were minor, a date misremembered, a location misstated. Others carried more weight, like the discovery of a physical trace linking Daniel to the scene. Each revelation was small, yet cumulative, creating a web of evidence that the defense could no longer easily unravel. The defense tried to counteract these revelations by discrediting witnesses and emphasizing Daniel's community contributions. But it was clear that the jurors were already influenced, subtly, unconsciously, by the narrative Max and Lily had begun to outline. Daniel's reputation, once his greatest shield, now seemed insufficient against the quiet force of truth unfolding before him. By the end of that week, the trial had shifted irreversibly. The prosecution had successfully transformed a weak case into a compelling story, not just through evidence, but through timing, instinct, and observation. Max had played an unspoken role, signaling the inconsistencies in real time. Lily had played hers too, reminding the courtroom that innocence often sees what adults overlook. The town outside the courthouse buzzed with speculation. Conversations at local cafes, workplaces, and playgrounds all returned to the same point. Something extraordinary was happening. Everyone knew about the dog's growl and the child's simple declaration. People whispered that the courtroom had changed, that the balance of power had subtly but surely shifted in favor of truth. Inside, Daniel felt it too. His once commanding presence now seemed fragile. Every carefully constructed argument felt like a fragile facade. Every glance at Max reminded him that appearances weren't enough to hide what he had done. And every whisper, every small observation, carried the weight of undeniable instinct. The stage was set. The hidden clues, once overlooked, were now being pieced together. The courtroom was no longer just a legal arena. It had become a theater of instinct, innocence, and revelation. Every juror, whether they acknowledged it or not, was aware that the truth was inching closer to the surface. And somewhere in the back of the gallery, Lily pressed her small hand to Max's fur and whispered once more, softly but with certainty, "See? He knows." The dog didn't respond, of course, but his still, alert posture seemed to acknowledge the accuracy of her words. The case that had seemed destined for a likely acquittal was now tilting. Evidence, instinct, and the quiet observations of a child and a dog had combined into a force no one could ignore. The unraveling had begun. Tomorrow, the trial would continue. More witnesses would testify, more questions would be asked, and more cracks would appear in the defense's carefully constructed story. But by now, everyone in the courtroom, whether they realized it or not, understood one thing: truth, once stirred, cannot be contained. The courtroom was heavy with anticipation as the 7th week of the trial began. Each day had built upon the last, and now the tension was almost unbearable. Daniel Mercer sat at the defense table, once confident and composed, now visibly uncomfortable. His polished suit seemed constrictive, his gestures smaller, his usual calm demeanor fraying at the edges. The jurors, meanwhile, were watching carefully, analyzing not just his words, but every motion, every glance, every subtle change in posture. The prosecution, led by Carla Jennings, had methodically laid the groundwork. Each day added new pieces to the mosaic of evidence, and now the threads were beginning to converge. DNA traces, fingerprints, and witness statements that had once seemed isolated now formed a pattern, a silent accusation that no charm, no wealth, no polished demeanor could erase. Max, the police dog, sat alert as always, beside Officer Davis. His keen eyes scanned Daniel constantly, catching the subtle signs of nervousness that no human might notice. A twitch of the finger, a shift in weight, a fleeting look of panic. While he could not speak, his reactions told a story that was increasingly impossible to ignore. Lily, perched quietly on her mother's lap, watched with rapt attention. She had been the silent observer from the beginning, and though she didn't fully understand the legal proceedings, she understood instinctively. Max was alert, and Daniel's behavior didn't match his words. She whispered occasionally to her bunny, pointing first at the dog, then at Daniel, as if confirming what she already knew. The dog knew, and the man was guilty. The morning began with a surprise witness, a neighbor who had previously been hesitant to speak. With careful questioning, the prosecution drew out details that contradicted Daniel's prior statements. The neighbor's account was precise: times, locations, and certain odd behaviors that Daniel had tried to conceal. Each revelation added weight to the narrative. Daniel's face grew pale. He fidgeted with his hands, and for the first time in weeks, he did not look confident. The defense attorney, Martin Cole, tried to interject, but even his voice seemed less commanding. The cracks in their carefully constructed defense were widening. Then came the pivotal moment. The prosecution introduced a piece of overlooked evidence, a personal item belonging to the victim, discovered in a location only Daniel could have accessed. The revelation was subtle, yet undeniable. The jurors shifted in their seats, murmuring quietly. Daniel's composure faltered, his voice dropping when he attempted to respond. Max reacted instantly. A low, measured growl rolled from his throat, not aggressive, but full of warning. His ears perked, his gaze locked on Daniel, and he shifted slightly forward, the kind of movement that a dog makes when instincts scream truth. Officer Davis tightened his grip on the leash, acknowledging the dog's reaction silently. Lily, eyes wide, whispered again to her bunny, "See? He knows." Her words carried through the courtroom, faint yet potent. Adults tried to ignore them, but the truth had a way of breaking through barriers, especially when spoken innocently and without guile. The defense scrambled, attempting to explain away the reactions, the inconsistencies, the timing, the overlooked evidence. But with each attempt, Daniel's own anxiety betrayed him. He began to speak faster, stumbling over words, contradicting earlier statements. The jurors noticed. Even the judge's stern gaze seemed sharper, more exacting. The prosecution pressed harder. Questions were pointed, precise, and relentless. "Mr. Mercer," Carla Jennings said, her voice calm but firm, "you've told us several versions of events. Can you account for the discrepancies in your statements?" Daniel swallowed hard. I don't know. Perhaps?" His voice trailed, weak, unconvincing. Max's ears twitched. His gaze never wavered. He had been trained to detect fear, deceit, and guilt. Every subtle sign was being registered, every tension noted. And the jurors, perhaps subconsciously, were noticing as well. It was then that a key witness, an employee of Daniel's company, took the stand. She recounted a series of events that directly contradicted Daniel's testimony. Her statements were clear, precise, and corroborated by documents the prosecution had quietly obtained earlier. Each revelation was like a strike, chipping away at Daniel's facade. For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely panicked. His eyes darted to the jury, then to his lawyer, then to the floor. He fidgeted with his hands, a visible tremor betraying his fear. Max reacted again, his posture rigid, low growl emanating softly. The dog had confirmed what the witnesses' documents and inconsistencies had already indicated. Daniel Mercer was not telling the truth. Lily noticed it all. Her small body leaned forward on the bench, eyes locked on the dog and the man. She murmured softly, "He knows, Bunny. He knows," pointing at Daniel. Her mother tried to quiet her, whispering harshly, "Lily, please, be quiet." But Lily didn't need anyone's permission. She had already seen the truth. The courtroom was silent, except for the low murmur of the jurors and the occasional shuffle of papers. The tension was almost unbearable. Daniel's carefully crafted image, the community leader, the trusted businessman, was crumbling. His arguments sounded hollow, rehearsed, and increasingly desperate. Finally, the prosecution laid out the timeline meticulously. Every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every subtle behavioral cue was connected, forming a web that left Daniel no room to maneuver. The jurors could see it clearly now. The inconsistencies, the evidence, and the reactions of both the dog and the child all pointed to a single conclusion. Daniel's defense faltered completely. He stammered, tried to redirect, but his words were empty against the mounting proof. Max, sensing the final unraveling, shifted slightly, low growl echoing faintly. His eyes never left Daniel. Lily, too, had reached her limit. She stood slightly, clutching her bunny tightly, and whispered once more, "Dog knows." It was as if her words, repeated now 3 times over the course of the trial, carried an unspoken verdict. The courtroom absorbed it in silence. Even the judge, though trained to disregard irrelevant distractions, felt the weight of innocence speaking truth. Daniel slumped slightly in his chair. For weeks he had relied on appearances, charm, and legal maneuvering. But the combination of instinct and innocence, Max and Lily, had revealed cracks no argument could hide. The defense attorney looked on helplessly, realizing that logic and rhetoric could not counter the undeniable truth unfolding before them. The prosecution rested, confident that the story was complete. The evidence was overwhelming, the inconsistencies clear, and the reactions, human and animal, impossible to ignore. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation for what would come next. The deliberation, the verdict, the conclusion. Outside, the town was electric. Conversations were filled with speculation, disbelief, and awe at the unusual forces that had guided the trial. the loyal dog, the observant child, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Inside, Lily returned to her mother's side, exhausted but unwavering. Max lay calmly at Officer Davis's feet, alert but subdued. The day had reached its climax. The truth had been revealed, and no amount of charm, wealth, or manipulation could hide it any longer. For Daniel Mercer, the unraveling was complete. The evidence was irrefutable, the witnesses credible, and the instincts of those who could not lie, a dog and a child, had exposed the hidden crime. The courtroom now waited for the final act, the verdict that would confirm what everyone had silently suspected. The courthouse was quiet that morning, but the air was thick with anticipation. After weeks of testimony, unexpected revelations, and subtle yet undeniable signs from a police dog and a 3-year-old child, the stage was set for the final act. Jurors filed in, their faces serious, carrying the collective weight of days spent dissecting evidence, testimony, and the small but powerful gestures that had quietly shaped their perception. Daniel Mercer sat at the defense table, tense and pale. He had faced scrutiny before, but nothing had prepared him for this. His carefully constructed image, the successful businessman, the respected member of the community, had been stripped away piece by piece. Max, the loyal German shepherd, sat alert beside Officer Davis, his presence a constant reminder that instincts could speak volumes. And Lily, now almost glowing with quiet certainty, sat at her mother's side, clutching her bunny, small but central to the courtroom's shifting energy. The judge cleared his throat and addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard all the evidence, seen the exhibits, and listened to the testimony. You will now deliberate and render your verdict." As the jurors filed out to the deliberation room, the courtroom seemed to exhale collectively. The tension that had gripped every seat, every witness, every observer began to shift. Now it was anticipation tinged with relief, fear, and hope. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered excitedly about the role Max had played, and the repeated words of a child, "Dog nose." Social media buzzed. Parents in town talked about the innocence and power of perception, and the story spread like wildfire. The unusual witnesses, the loyal dog and the observant child, had captured the imagination of everyone following the case. Inside, Daniel Mercer remained silent, staring at the polished floor. He had prepared for weeks for every question, every objection, every strategy the prosecution could use. Yet nothing had prepared him for the unspoken evidence, the instincts of Max, and the clarity of Lily's observations. His own confidence betrayed him with each small movement, a twitch, a hesitation, a fleeting grimace, all captured by the sharp eyes of those in the courtroom. Hours passed as the jury deliberated. Outside, families and friends gathered, whispering nervously, sharing theories, and praying for justice. Inside, Officer Davis sat quietly beside Max, scratching the dog behind the ears, acknowledging the silent role his partner had played throughout the trial. Max's alert posture never wavered, yet he remained calm, as if understanding that the final moments would soon reveal the truth. Finally, the jury returned. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman with a steady gaze, stood and addressed the court. Every person in the room held their breath, sensing the significance of this moment. Daniel's face drained of color, his hands trembling slightly. He had hoped, perhaps, that the accumulated weight of appearances and arguments might still sway the outcome. The foreperson cleared her throat and spoke firmly. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Mercer, guilty as charged." The words echoed through the courtroom like a hammer striking stone. Gasps, murmurs, and a few stifled sobs filled the room. Justice had been declared. The culmination of evidence, instinct, and innocence had triumphed over deception and carefully crafted facades. Max shifted slightly, a subtle movement, as if acknowledging the resolution. His gaze remained on Daniel, steady and unyielding. Lily, sensing the change, clutched her bunny tightly, her face breaking into a small, knowing smile. She had seen the truth all along, and now it had been recognized by those who mattered most. The judge banged his gavel, restoring order. The jury has delivered its verdict. The court will adjourn for sentencing at a later date. Daniel Mercer, please remain in custody. Daniel's composure crumbled completely. He was led from the courtroom under careful watch, his mind racing with disbelief and frustration. For weeks, he had attempted to manipulate appearances, twist narratives, and control perceptions. Yet in the end, the truth, undeniable and persistent, had prevailed. The courthouse erupted in subdued celebration. Families, victims, and members of the community shared quiet nods of relief. Carla Jennings, a district attorney, exhaled, her carefully orchestrated prosecution vindicated. Officer Davis patted Max on the head, whispering, "Good job, partner." "You did it," Max responded with a gentle wag of his tail, calm but proud. And Lily, the quiet observer who had played an unexpected yet pivotal role, was lifted by her mother and hugged tightly. "You were very brave, Lily," her mother whispered, tears in her eyes. "You helped everyone see the truth." Lily simply hugged her bunny and whispered. Dog knew it too. News outlets reported the verdict widely, highlighting the extraordinary circumstances. Headlines praised the role of instinct and innocence. 3-year-old and police dog uncover the truth. Justice served in Brooksville trial. Dog and child witnesses capture hearts and reveal hidden crime. The story captivated not only the town but the nation, a testament to the idea that truth often emerges in the most unexpected forms. In the days following the trial, the community reflected on what had transpired. Daniel Mercer's reputation was irreparably damaged, his carefully constructed life of charm and influence undone by evidence, instinct, and the unfiltered honesty of a child. Families who had feared injustice felt relief. The courthouse, once a place of tension and dread, became a symbol of the enduring power of truth. Max returned to his routine with Officer Davis, though now with recognition and quiet respect from the community. Children in town whispered about the brave dog who had helped solve the case. And Lily? She continued to visit the courthouse occasionally, though now more as a symbol than a witness, her innocence and courage remembered by all who had witnessed her pivotal role. For the Mercer trial, the lessons were clear. Truth cannot be masked indefinitely. Evidence is crucial, but instinct and observation, even from a small child or a loyal dog, can guide justice in ways that defy expectation. And in Brooksville, the combination of meticulous investigation, sharp instincts, and innocent insight had restored faith in the system, reminding everyone that justice, though sometimes slow, is ultimately attainable. Lily sat with her bunny that evening, recounting the events in her own simple way. She didn't understand the full weight of legal procedures, nor did she need to. To her, the truth had been obvious from the start. Max had known, she had known, and now the adults had known too. In her young mind, that was enough. And so, the trial ended, leaving a lasting legacy. Daniel Mercer faced the consequences of his actions. Max remained a hero in the quiet, steadfast way only dogs can embody. And Lily, small, observant, and unwavering, became a reminder that sometimes the purest voices of truth come from the most unexpected sources. The courthouse doors closed for the final time that day, but the story endured. A child and a dog had revealed the truth that adults struggled to see, and justice had finally been served.